The German uniforms from the Second World War, particularly the SS uniforms, are still considered today as great examples of stylistic work in clothing. And many people associate the origin of these uniforms with the famous men's clothing brand Hugo Boss, which to this day is one of the major leaders in the luxury market for men's fashion. Let's understand today what the relationship was between Hugo Boss and the SS uniforms. I am Julio Cesar, a military history professor and researcher at the War Room. And every Sunday, we bring you a special video so you can learn and have fun with your family. Before we start today's content, I want to let you know that we are just a few days away from our expedition to Italy to celebrate the 80 years of the FEB's victory, so you can get to know the entire route the division took there in the theater of operations, and where I will show and explain everything about Brazil's participation in the Second World War. If you want to be part of our expedition, click on the link in the description and fill out the form there. Our agents will get in touch with you and offer you the best conditions to make this dream come true, all right? I will be your guide, and I look forward to seeing you there. On July 8th, 1885, the fifth and last child of Louise and Heinrich Boss was born. Two workers, actually, two entrepreneurs in the textile industry. They lived in a small town called Metzingen in the south of Germany, just a few kilometers away from Stuttgart. This fifth and last baby of the couple was baptized as Hugo Ferdinand Boss. Of course, little Hugo grew up playing among his parents' weaving machines, and when he was 18 years old, he joined the German army, serving 2 years of military service between 1903 and 1905. After leaving military service at the age of 20, his parents sent him to do internships at several major companies in the textile sector, particularly in the city of Constance, where Hugo became an apprentice in the clothing manufacturing industry. At that time, his parents were working mainly with the production of women's underwear, and at the age of 23, in 1908, he ended up taking over the management of his parents' business. But 6 years went by, and in 1914, the First World War broke out in Europe, and Hugo Boss soon received a draft notice for military service. Although very little is known about Hugo Boss's military service in the First World War, he served throughout the entire conflict as a soldier, finishing the war in 1918 with the rank of corporal. The first years after the war in Germany were very confusing. With the founding of the Weimar Republic, which succeeded the Second German Reich starting in 1919, Hugo Boss, trying to readjust to his normal life, ended up starting his own business in 1924 with the help of brothers Albert and Theodor Brockler, who joined him as investor partners, leaving Hugo, the only one of the three with real experience in the textile industry, in charge of managing the new company's business. Contrary to what we might think, Hugo Boss did not start out selling pieces to the luxury market. He actually started out making pieces for a much more accessible market, with shirts, jackets, work uniforms, sportswear, and some overcoats. And he also, contrary to what we might imagine, did not have a large textile company. In fact, it was very small, and by the mid-1920s, he had about 30 employees. In 1928, he got his first contract to supply brown uniforms for the SA. The SA, or Sturmabteilung, was a kind of shock battalion of the Nazi Party, actually its own militia for the security of its events and personalities, especially Adolf Hitler, and the Sturmabteilung was the force that led the Munich Putsch, or Beer Hall Putsch, in 1923, an unsuccessful attempt to take control in Germany, which ended up resulting in Hitler's imprisonment and the disbandment of the Nazi Party. One of the guys who stood alongside Hitler that day was Gerhard Rosbach, this guy in the picture here, who had been a former leader of the Freikorps, those paramilitary free corps that operated in Germany right after the end of World War I to fight socialist and communist uprisings in the country. In the days following the failed coup to avoid being arrested, Rosbach then fled to Austria, and it was there in Austria that he happened to discover a warehouse with a huge quantity of brown shirts known as Lettow shirts, a reference to General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, who was a commander of German guerrillas in Africa during World War I. These brown shirts then, as you might have guessed, were originally intended for use in Africa, but were now completely unused and were acquired by Gerhard Rosbach for distribution within the Sturmabteilung itself. And that is the origin of the nickname that the Sturmabteilung itself earned, the brown shirts. So, as I already said, in 1928, Hugo Boss won the first contract to manufacture the Sturmabteilung's brown shirts, the new Sturmabteilung uniform, which appeared after Hitler was released from prison in 1925. But shortly after getting his first contract, in 1929, Hugo Boss was hit hard by the crisis caused by the New York Stock Exchange crash, or the 1929 stock market crash. And despite the rapid growth in the number of Sturmabteilung men, his business ended up going into a downward spiral. And in 1931, Hugo Boss filed for bankruptcy with the government. In that atmosphere of discouragement, complete lack of confidence in the market, and in immediate future prospects, Hugo Boss ended up getting much closer to the revolutionary ideas proposed by Adolf Hitler and the growing Nazi Party. And shortly after his company went bankrupt, in that same year of 1931, he became a member of the Nazi Party with registration number 508,889. At the same time, Hugo Boss also became a sponsoring member of a new organization still within the SA, which was gaining a lot of prestige, and in the following years would basically take the lead in the country, the SS. The SS was a small organization, a kind of elite squad for Hitler's security within the SA, which at that time already had millions of men in its ranks. And in 1929, this guy here, Himmler, took over the leadership of the SS. You probably already know him, and we've already covered his biography as well. You can click here and watch it right after this video. As you can see in this photo here, the first SS uniforms were actually the same, almost identical to the SA uniforms. What I mean by that is that the brown color prevailed in the color of the shirt and also the pants of the unit. It was Himmler who, at that same time, started to introduce the color black into the organization's uniforms, initially changing the color of the pants, the tie, and also the insignias that are on the collar of the shirt. This pattern would be officially adopted by the SS until 1932, when Himmler then had the idea to revolutionize the unit's look to really distinguish it from all the other members of the SA. He then introduces the unit's famous black uniform. And now our story reaches an important point, because Himmler did not go looking for Hugo Boss to design the new black uniform he had in mind. Heinrich Himmler turned to this guy here, Karl Diptych, an SS Oberfuhrer, a designer in the ceramics field, who would later go on to create most of the designs for the SS uniform elements, such as the dagger attached by a chain, the SS sabers, and also the rank insignias that were used by the force. If you want to learn about the entire code of SS insignias and ranks, we also have a video that you can check out by clicking up here. So the conception, the design, the cut, and the lines of the new black SS uniform were handled by Karl Diptych and also by Walter Heck, a draftsman, a designer who also became very famous for being the author, the creator of the famous SS runes. So, starting in 1932, the SS abandoned that look, which was very similar to the Sturmabteilung's, only changing the colors, as I mentioned, the color of the pants, the color of the tie, and also the kepi they wore on their heads. That kepi that was very characteristic of the Sturmabteilung. For this new look here on the left, already with all the pieces in black, both the pants and the jacket, also adopting a more militarized traditional type of cap, similar to the one used by the German army, but of course with different colors and symbolism, while still keeping the brown shirt worn under the jacket, exactly to maintain that historical element of connection with the Sturmabteilung. And once Hitler takes power in Germany in January 1933, the ranks of the SS will swell even more, because Heinrich Himmler now has a much greater responsibility to exercise his power and his network of protection for the party leadership throughout the country. And here you can see a business card from Hugo Boss from exactly that period. Look up there. We make uniforms for the Sturmabteilung, SS, and HJ. HJ is Hitlerjugend, or Hitler Youth. The black SS uniform then becomes the unit's trademark, and it will especially become famous after the Night of the Long Knives, which purged the Sturmabteilung leadership and resulted in the assassination of Ernst Röhm in 1934. From then on, the SS quickly grows in prestige, replacing the role that was previously held by the Sturmabteilung, while the Sturmabteilung in turn loses prestige until it becomes an almost insignificant force in Nazi Germany. In this image here, we can see the complete black uniform, the black leather overcoat that also became quite famous and widely used in the SS at that time, as well as the white uniforms for summer use. But that black uniform also had a very serious problem, because after the Night of the Long Knives and the loss of prestige of the Sturmabteilung, the SS took over many of its former functions, and many of these new functions were field duties, not just office work inside the cities. And that black uniform ended up being very impractical for this field use. Because as you well know, black clothing gets dirty very quickly, and the appearance of a uniform like that becomes quite poor with any level of dirt on it. In 1934 then, the SS quickly solved this problem by adopting the gray uniform for field use. It's a uniform with a much simpler cut, much more military, much closer to what was used by the German army, and which the SS units and the future Waffen-SS began to adopt for field use. From then on, this gray uniform was also authorized for use by office troops within the cities. In that same year, 1938, Hugo Boss's main client stopped being the SS and became the German armed forces themselves, the Wehrmacht, a clear sign of the significant expansion in the number of army, navy, and also Luftwaffe, the Air Force troops. But even so, Hugo Boss never, throughout the entire Third Reich, became a major, one of the largest manufacturers of German uniforms. That role belonged to other companies. In fact, Boss, throughout the entire period of the Third Reich, never stopped being a Mittelstand, a medium-sized company that was never vital for supplying uniforms to the regime. Starting in 1940, Boss also began producing many uniforms for the nascent Waffen-SS, the armed SS or military component of the SS, which would actually operate on the front lines in World War II. And at that time, Boss had about 300 employees. This number was supplemented by 140 Polish seamstresses taken from the Polish textile city of Bielsko and brought to Germany by the Gestapo itself to work for him. In addition to this forced labor contingent, Boss also received 40 French prisoners of war who worked for him between 1940 and 1941. Since the city of Metzingen was truly a textile industry city par excellence, the owners of these textile industries decided in 1943 to build a specially designed camp to house these forced laborers from the textile industry. And the living, food, and hygiene conditions in this camp, of course, deteriorated very quickly, just like in other similar environments in the Third Reich at the time. And in 1944, Hugo Boss even submitted a request to the Gestapo so that he himself could house the seamstresses in his own factory. And during these last months of the Third Reich, under a lot of pressure from the Allied armies in the West, and also from the Red Army in the East, the production of uniforms on Boss's assembly line continued until the end of the war. And when his factory was captured by the Allies, a picture frame was found in a prominent place in his office with a photo of Boss and Hitler together, taken in front of the Berghof, Hitler's house in Bavaria. In 1946, the new German government judged Hugo Boss as a major collaborator of the regime, stripped him of his rights to own businesses, to vote, and also imposed a fine of 100,000 marks, which was a very high amount at the time. However, Boss appealed the decision, and in a new trial, his status was reduced to just a follower of the regime, and his fine was also reduced to 25,000 marks. But with his reputation already quite damaged politically, Boss handed over control of the company to his son, Siegfried Boss, and also to his stepson, Eugen Hawley. Boss ended up passing away shortly after, on August 9, 1948, at the age of 63, as a result of a dental abscess. Curiously, Boss's production line reopened in the immediate post-war period, manufacturing uniforms for the French army that occupied that area in the southwest of Germany. And it was only in 1950 that Boss received its first order to manufacture luxury suits, becoming in the following decades one of the world's leading names in men's fashion. If you like military history, how about adding a really interesting item to your collection? Take a look at this collection of 10 exclusive cards celebrating the 80th anniversary of D-Day that I got in Normandy last year. Beautifully illustrated with 10 images related to the Allied landing on the French beaches 80 years ago. And it could be yours, because the ticket for you to enter costs only 2 Ries, and you can buy it by clicking the link right below. So go get your ticket and good luck. Now tell me, did you already know the true story of Hugo Boss and his relationship with the Third Reich? Did you already know the true story of Hugo Boss's relationship with the Third Reich? Did you think that Boss had designed the black uniforms, or did you already know that he only manufactured them? Let us know in the comments. Well, if you like this video, then share it with your friends. Also, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to War Room so you don't miss anything. I'll stop here and thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from War Room.